Hey everyone, welcome back! Warframe 1999 has dropped, and with it comes new gear, new quests, new content, and importantly, new reworks. Today we're going to be looking at Nyx and how she fares after her changes because, well, yeah, it's a doozy. This video will cover the more accessible and easy to use Nyx Assimilate setup post-rework, whereas I will leave the damage cap absorb build for the next video, as a lot more technical stuff is going on with that one. So what has changed with Nyx? Quite a bit. First of all, Nyx's passive is now similar to Yareli's, granting up to 200% crit chance to primaries and secondaries, 40% per enemy affected by rad procs. Nyx's kit has been souped up to spam rad procs everywhere, so this is basically free on gun builds. Good for you, as today's builds work with both gun and melee. Next up is mind control. They apparently have better AI now, but I haven't really noticed that when I was testing, and the longer they're alive, the more dumb they seem to become and do nothing. You can now see them on the map though, and damage of what they shoot, as well as a better HUD icon of their damage buff. It's still questionable and hard to use ability that requires a lot of outside help. But hey, at least you can now recast it on new targets without needing to uncast accidental targets anymore. They say its base duration was increased from 45 to 60 seconds, but it is bugged to base 30 seconds currently. The Mind Freak Augment now gives plus 1000 damage to the target instead of plus 500. Perhaps the biggest change is Psychic Bolts. Previously capped to 6 or 7 was it per cast, and recasting removed the old strip. The same is true now, except there is a bonus effect. Killing enemies affected by bolts will spread 2 more bolts, irrespective of the cast cap. There's no limit to how many times they can spread, but they all share a global timer of the original cast. When that expires, they all expire. Stripping defense from enemies with their 2 now also grants the respective resource, armor from armor strip, shields from shield strip, and overguard from overguard strip. The Augment pacifying bolts was buffed to apply 1 stack of radiation on hit, though personally I don't deem the Augment that useful anymore. Her third ability, Chaos, has barely changed. This was the most useful all-purpose ability on her kit, so it only got a small tweak of also applying 10 rad procs on everything it hits. Mostly cosmetic, they still get the confusion effect, and this is useful for condition overload, manifold bond, and increased self-damage to each other. Now, her fourth ability has been changed the most. Absorb is no longer a channeled ability, but instead duration-based one that you can uncast to detonate early. On top of tracking damage you receive, it now also stacks damage off the damage of confused enemies. In other words, those with rad procs, probably from casting Chaos. It also includes damage dealt from mind control targets, but this is generally not useful without going all in on a mind control build, which is for a later video. Yes, this means you no longer lose all energy based off damage you receive, which means the ability no longer breaks you in endurance runs. You can now also float up and down with jump and crouch. And finally, she gains 1 second of iframes per 5000 damage absorbed at the end of cast. Perhaps more interestingly, Assimilate also receives some big benefits. It is still channeled, but the energy drain from damage received has also been removed, just like the base ability. Base drain has been increased from 4 to 6.5 energy per second, but that's basically nothing. She can now also jump and assimilate, similar to Ivar's Prowl, so that means those ledges will no longer be stopping you. Today's video will focus on an updated Assimilate build to take advantage of the rework and the all-new tool since the original build nearly 2 years ago. It works with both guns and melee, so feel free to substitute those in where desired. Let's take a closer look at what's going on. We use Assimilate to remain invincible the entire mission while using our Nautilus to drag enemies over to us via cordon for destruction to overcome any possible crowd control we inflict on them. The helmet of choice, Wrathful Advance, can be both used as a mobility tool and buffer for melee setups while retaining our iframes. That's also why we have some range built. Daggers are no longer necessary for scaling, as Psychic Bolt's constant repropagation on kill for full defense strip makes it near passive after the initial casts. This means any melee, any gun, will work. We use our companion to source most of our primer status effects to activate Manifold Bond for cordon spam. That way you can use whatever kind of DPS weapon build you want. As we're going for weapon damage today, I subsumed over mind control. Let's take a closer look at the Nyx build. Note that none of the Archon shards are required for today. They are for testing a future build. Cunning Drift is only really needed for melee setups to push Wrathful Advance's teleport out to 24 meters. The aura will change depending on playstyle. Melees use Ready Steel for heavy attack setups, guns can use literally anything else. Even without shards, Multi-Efficiency is used to bump us up to 141 duration, as we will always be in iframes and not take shield damage. That grants 14 seconds of Wrathful Advance buffs and 21 seconds of Psychic Psychic Bolt's repropagation. Assimilate Drain is minimized to 1.62 energy a second and easily offset with Equilibrium. We get even more duration alongside Strength with Arcane Ice Storm, which requires fully frozen enemies. This can be replaced with Molt Augmented if you want a more passive buff. You basically just sit in Assimilate and blender everything that comes over, or you teleport to it. But what about the weapons? Today's particular showcase was done with melee, but as I said, this Nyx is compatible with gun DPS builds also. I chose Glaxon as a cold primer for Arcane Ice Storm and making use of Shivering Contagion for easier AoE full freeze. It's not needed really. If you're going gun DPS route, you can also use Molt Augmented as I said for freedom of gun choice, especially because you can offload the cold procs to a Sentinel with Tazicor. For my melee, this build serves as a template instead of a copy-paste. As mentioned before, the Psychic Bolt's repropagation has made Argonac dagger builds unnecessary on Nyx. What I would recommend is picking any kind of Incarnon melee with global movement speed buff perks. Today, I chose the Okina Prime Incarnon with these perk trees. Plus 30% move speed is helpful versus Assimilate's movement penalty. And you can even bring it along if you're using gun DPS build since it will permanently be active. It means I don't have to literally teleport everywhere with Wrathful Advance anymore. I further slotted Dispatch Overdrive for even more mobility since Wrathful Advance uses heavy attacks anyways. This is a generic heavy attack build with Galvanized Steel granting initial combo as well, and it doesn't even matter if you use melee influence or another arcane such as Afflictions, or even melee exposure. I skipped Banes as melee or Galvanized Elemental as is enough DPS against fully stripped enemies if you're using Psychic Bolts. We mod range to make dragged enemies easier to hit, and condition overload to scale base damage off our Sentinel priming. The Afflictions variant uses Corrupt Charge instead, since that combined with Ready Steel and possibly Coaction Drift pushes us to 141 combo overall for 8 times scaling on heavy attacks. Nautilus Cordon Spam will make Afflictions work by hitting everything in one spot if your melee is compatible for producing lifted or knockdown statuses. Just remember that if you're going the Afflictions route, you cannot lift or knock down frozen enemies, so Molt Augmented would be preferred over an Arcane Ice Storm full freeze build. Our focus school today is pretty flexible too. I chose Madurai for faster cast speed and some strength. Because it's heavy attack with initial combo, Neramon isn't really needed either. If you're on a gun build, even less reason to use Neramon, right? So just use whatever you feel like. Do note that Xenoric will not work because we're perma-channeling Assimilate. Our companion of choice will be Nautilus, because this lets us drag in enemies even if they are frozen from Galaxon's cold procs or self-aggro from casting Chaos. You actually shouldn't need Chaos because you're always invincible, so yeah, this is our Cordon build. Most important part is Manifold Bond so we can re-trigger Sentinel precepts constantly. It also applies to Guardian, which is normal on Cordon setups even if it does nothing on today's build since we're iframed forever in Assimilate. Vacuum, Radar, and Regen for quality of life as usual so we can see where our victims are coming from. Synth Deconstruct allows Pegasus to drop health orbs for Equilibrium, which then brings us to our premier Sentinel weapon for support, Tazicor. This is basically new core on a Sentinel, easy priming, good range with chaining. We also gained a pre-baked radiation mod from Whispers in the Wall last year. This year, we got a pre-baked magnetic mod in Warframe 1999. Together, this lets us run 4 elements on this innate electric weapon, so we get electric, radiation, magnetic, and viral. Boost damage against health, shields, and overguard. Crack controls, and a light dose of innate electric. Honestly, the best we have for priming on Cordon builds, and Sinister Reach lets it reach out even further. And that's it. All you gotta do is sit and Assimilate forever, get around bigger areas with Wrathful Advance, use your movement speed and Incarnon melee, which doesn't even need to be held out, to move around smaller areas faster instead of having to teleport. Heavy attack via Wrathful in groups for big damage. You can also spam light attacks as needed, or even use your gun to DPS. Psychic Bolts if you need armor strip and it will passively spread. That's all you need to do. Enjoy, stay tuned for the Absorb DPS build dropping tomorrow as that one has a lot more theory crap going on and warrants its own topic. Cheers! If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or better yet subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'll try my best to get new information out as soon as possible like we did with the Warframe 1999 update. Subscribe if you want to see some interesting memes and builds. You don't miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching and see you all next time.